U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris travels to Central America to address the surge of migrants arriving at the U.S. southern border. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. For years, the United States has tried to solve the immigration crisis and failed. This week, Vice President Kamala Harris is meeting with leaders in Guatemala and Mexico in search of a solution. In April, the number of migrants apprehended while seeking asylum in the United States reached a 20-year high. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Border Patrol agents apprehended more than 173,000 people. Of those, more than 111,000 were immediately expelled under a pandemic emergency health order. CGTN's Franc Contreras reports now on the U.S. Vice President's trip and the major challenges facing the region.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to Guatemala got off to a bumpy start. Her flight to Guatemala City was delayed due to technical problems. On Sunday night, she landed at an Air Force base near the Guatemalan capital and was greeted like royalty. In stark contrast to the previous administration, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris want to create a more humane approach for dealing with immigration and at the same time fight smuggling and trafficking. This past April, during a virtual meeting with the Guatemalan president, Harris said the U.S. will address the root causes of immigration.
We are looking at the issue of poverty and the lack, therefore, of economic opportunities, the issue of extreme weather conditions and the lack of climate adaptation, as well as corruption and the lack of good governance, and violence against women, indigenous people, LGBTQ people, and Afro-descendants.
Guatemalan President Alejandro Giammattei has said his nation will take steps to strengthen bilateral ties with the United States. He also knows Harris will raise tough questions about corruption in his government. Most migrants from the region are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The U.S. is also keeping a close eye on Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele. El Salvador's Legislative Assembly, led by Bukele's party, recently fired the Attorney General and top judges after the U.S. said members of his party are corrupt. The U.S. has also implicated the president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, in an alleged cocaine trafficking conspiracy.
Impunity and corruption have deteriorated democratic institutions in Central America. As a consequence, we also see a deterioration in the quality of life of the population. That is what provokes the people to leave.
Analysts say corruption leads to extreme poverty, which is also a contributing factor in the spike of migration. Efforts to improve security are also on the table. Vice President Harris brings good news that the United States will donate millions of COVID-19 vaccines to Central American nations and Mexico.
The Vice President will meet with Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on Tuesday to talk about, among other things, U.S. plans to invest in the region and create jobs that will entice Central Americans to remain in their own countries. Franc Contreras, CGTN, Mexico City.
For more now on the growing problem of undocumented immigration, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Chicago is Luis Gutierrez. He's a former U.S. Congressman for the state of Illinois. From Washington, D.C., Rafael Bernal is a staff writer for the political newspaper The Hill. And Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist right here in Washington, D.C. And Rafael, let me start with you and talk about this visit that Kamala Harris, the Vice President, is making to Guatemala and Mexico. What are your expectations? What do you think will come out of it?
Well, expectations were really quite low because she has to deal with very difficult politics in the region, difficult politicians in Bukele, as your report mentioned, in Andrés Manuel López Obrador, President of Mexico, and in Alejandro Giammattei, who has some accusations of corruption surrounding, if not him directly, definitely the political elite of Guatemala. So it was difficult politically. What people are remembering so far is that Kamala Harris went down to Guatemala to say to Guatemalans, don't come. She repeated it, don't come. This is a message that the Biden administration has been pushing since the very beginning of the administration, and one really has to wonder who that missive is intended for, because they're certainly not going to convince Republicans in the United States that, to not use immigration as a political cudgel. That is going to happen regardless of what the Biden administration says. And certainly people who are in tragic circumstances in Central America, who feel that their best option is to risk coming to the United States, they're not going to stop coming because the vice president told them not to. So it's a difficult assignment. She's done well with the few tools she's been given. And the question really stays, how will we measure success? And I think only time will tell.
Ambassador Arturo Sarucán, what are your views on what is taking place right now? If the United States' intention with this visit by Vice President Kamala Harris to the region is to stem the flow of migrants from that region to the United States border, what do you see come out of these meetings? Because, this is not a new problem. We've had administration after administration grappling with this crisis in very different ways, but isn't it a little bit of a thankless task on the part of the Vice President to go down there and try and resolve this in a short period of time?
Well, Anand, there's certainly no magic potions or silver bullets in this. It's going to take time. One thing that policymakers in Washington, Republican or Democrat, need to understand is that you can't enforce or deter your way out of migration crises. The structural triggers for migration flows in Central America, whether it's climate change and the drought that is affecting important areas of the region, whether it's the cyclical nature of this, we all knew you don't have to be a rocket scientist. We all know that the first months of the year, we always see these increases in the numbers of migrants simply because of climate and weather patterns. As soon as the rains, which they're now moving in, start hitting the region, those flows diminish. So that gives the administration certainly a window to be able to say that they're now handling the situation. At the end of the day, the Biden administration understands that the only way you're going to move the needle is by investing in the structural causes, the trigger effects of that transmigration. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's whereas in Guatemala it's mainly rural and economically driven. In places like Honduras and El Salvador, it's more urban and driven because of insecurity and the gangs, etc. So there isn't, even for the North American, Northern Triangle, Central American nations, there isn't even one policy that can can be used for all three nations. So you're going to have to go about this in a careful way, in building those Lego blocks that will start accumulating, where you will need the support of Mexico, which is one reason why she goes to Mexico City as she lands there tonight, because all of this is part of a chain. And obviously, again, as you said, this is going to take commitment. It's going to take addressing some of the endemic challenges of lack of adequate governance in the region. And anyone expecting that she's going to come back and spike the ball in the end zone and say, we're done, we've solved this, is joking, is kidding, or is joking, and this won't be solved overnight.
Congressman Luis Gutierrez, thanks for joining us. This is a big challenge, and the U.S. approach right now is to put money up front. The U.S. is pledging $4 billion in investment in Central America to boost economic opportunities in the region, in the hope that people would not then be seeking opportunities here in the United States. This is not a new approach. In fact, there was a piece in the New York Times this morning which said that this is a strategy that has been tried before and it has failed. I mean, do you see any chance of anything coming out of this?
I think that, first of all, let's congratulate the administration on finally looking at the Western Hemisphere as a priority. Is it the vice president? Yes, it is the vice president. She understands what it is to come from an immigrant background. Now, having said that, that's the positive part. The not so positive part is, let's face it, Kamala Harris would not be vice president of the United States. I've been born in the United States had we told her parents not to come from India, not to come from Jamaica. As a matter of fact, the United States of America would not be the nation that it is today if we had told Italians and Irish don't come to the United States of America. The fact is that our economy is thriving and strong in great measure and in need of additional workforce. So it's good for the economy. We have a nation in which our birth rate is declining, and at the same time, there are jobs. Without being arrogant, we didn't spend 18 years, my wife and I, my daughter and her husband, raising my grandson who's going to the university in September so that he could go and work in a meatpacking plant. It's necessary for people to work at a meatpacking plant. It's honorable work. But let's face it, kids are going off to school and getting educated, and they're not going to meatpacking plants. They're not going to go into the fields to make sure that we have the food that we need. So look, we need new energy in our country. We need people with that kind of immigrant backbone to do the kind of hard work that's here in the United States of America.
Congressman, I hear what you're saying there, but those who oppose that approach, oppose what you were saying there, will say, look, there is a legal way to come into this country.
Yeah, and that's precisely what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We should have a legal way for people to come to the United States of America and provide the kind of workforce that the United States of America needs. And by simply saying don't come and placing barriers, look, we didn't say don't come to people in the Soviet Union, Jews in the Soviet Union. We said, come. This is a place for you in America. We didn't say to people fleeing the dictatorship in Cuba, don't come. As a matter of fact, we opened up the doors to them to come by the millions to the United States of America. That is the tradition of the United States of America. So we need them. Here's my point. Mm-hmm. We need them. They're an essential part of what our economy. Today, 8 million people live in a permanent underclass, mostly Latino, immigrants to the United States of America. Let's legalize them, and let's make sure we never again create, right, a underclass that is exploited and from which I and other American citizens benefit. So let's find legal ways for them to come here. Because let's face it, we're not going to eliminate the corruption in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. It's not going to happen. López Obrador, he's not even really out there protecting the democratic processes. Hundreds of people getting killed in the electoral process as we speak in Mexico.
Adolfo Franco, clearly there are 2 points to this, or maybe more than 2 points to this issue. It's a very emotional issue in some quarters. But what do you make of what Congressman Luis Gutierrez just told us? That isn't it time for the United States to recognize, to acknowledge that it is a nation of immigrants and that it's not going to be possible to stop this?
Well, there's a lot to unpack with all your guests here, but let me start out by just a couple of things before I answer the question directly. As I find it remarkable that the vice president that was appointed as the person in charge of the border crisis has yet to visit the border and is doing this visit to Central America months after the appointment, while there is a clear crisis on the border and uncontrolled, as your report correctly noted, illegal immigration coming into the country, created entirely by the incompetence of the Biden administration's abrupt change in policy from the previous administration's policies that have been working. I take exception with some of the comments that have been made. The Biden administration imposed initially a 100-day moratorium on deportations. Of course, a federal judge subsequently intervened to block that because it's clearly illegal. But the message certainly got out to Mexico and to Central America, and coyotes and these illegal sex trafficking and human trafficking and uncontrolled immigration that's very dangerous took place because of the signals this administration sent. In addition to that, they ended catch and release, which is another incentive to have people come into the country, be detained, and then released into the general populations. So the crisis that exists in this country is not cyclical. I'm sorry to disagree with the ambassador. These are figures we haven't seen in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, and frankly in 20 years. and have created this crisis, as all of this administration is doing. Now they're scrambling. President Trump had Operation Warp Speed. They have Operation Fiasco. With respect to the immigration into the United States, I was not born in the United States, and I'm in favor of legal immigration, as vast majority, if not all Americans are. We are a country of immigrants. We're not a country of illegal immigrants. And illegal immigration, and I do agree with this, creates an underclass that's undesirable. So we have to have a comprehensive reform that starts with border security, which we clearly do not have.
Yeah.
We clearly had policies that were working, and they were undone in very short order, and we had a flood of now illegal immigration to the country. Now, when you poll the American people, you have 71% of them opposing illegal immigration. Only 19% support what really the congressman, the ex-congressman is saying, which is 19% support really an open borders policy. There's a difference between political persecution of the Soviet Union, Cuba, which our law allows for the immigration of these people to come in legally, and economic refugees. The problem is the laws of the United States exist on the books, and some people do not want to apply them. So this is really what the underlying problem is, that we need a reform, a comprehensive reform, but there is very little will to do that unless we have serious border security, which is being undertaken by the previous administration with cooperation from the Mexican government, with the Remain in Mexico policy, and with Central American governments, all undone, a crisis created by the Biden administration.
Ambassador Sarukhan, what do you make of the fact that Adolfo Franco just told us that we're not going to be able to get corruption out of these governments in Central America? We're not going to be able to get rid of the horrific drug-related violence that takes place in these countries. We're not going to get rid of the poverty overnight, that people are still going to stream towards the border.
Well, there is, of course, the reality. The solutions to what ails Central America are not going to take just a couple of years. The issues that ail Central America took hundreds of years to create, frankly. But these are countries that have benefited from democratizing to some extent. These are countries that have improved from the 1980s. They were plagued by civil wars. They do understand that an authoritarian government, as they had pretty much for their entire history before those civil wars, that authoritarian governments tend to eventually exacerbate tensions, whether they're racial, whether they're social, whether they're ethnic. These countries have suffered through that. So there is a glimmer of hope, and there are signs of potential for improvement in the region. But yes, nobody serious is dreaming of any kind of short-term solutions for Central America.
May I add something quickly? Yeah, very quickly. I ran the United States government's foreign aid program for 6 years in the Bush administration. I was the administrator of USAID. I completely agree with the ambassador. We provided a lot of resources. We provided a great deal of them on the free trade and economic development and judicial reform. However, the bottom line on this is that there is a better economic opportunity in the United States, and there will be for decades, than there are in not only Central America, but throughout the world. And that is not what our law provides for illegal immigration to come in just because people are economic refugees. And that's what they are.
Ambassador Sarukhan.
Well, since I know the right wing of America always wants to co-opt the conversation. The fact is, nobody talked here about open borders, except the Republican on the panel, because that's always their diatribe, right? No, what we said, an organized fashion of people being able to come to the United States to fulfill the economic needs that we do. And let me just make this very clear to my Republican friends. If tomorrow the 8 million undocumented left this country, were banished from this country, we know exactly what would happen. An economic collapse of our food industry, of our agriculture, of our service industry across this nation. Let's not fool ourselves. The fact is that they're doing the jobs that those of us born in the United States don't. But that's the tradition of immigrants. The fact is, over 50,000 Cubans left Marielitos. Fidel Castro just opened up the jails and said, go to the United States of America. We welcomed them. We integrated them. This whole conversation about economic refugees and political refugees, do you think you dial 911 in any one of those countries and the police show up? You are under constant terror because of gangs, because of narco-terrorism that exists there. And lastly, I want to make this absolutely clear to everybody that is listening. The crisis that we have in those Central American countries is primarily due to what? To the insatiable demand that exists in the United States for the drugs and the drug cartels that reign in those countries because of our insatiable appetite for those drugs.
Ambassador Sarukhan, the Congressman, I'll get back to you. The Congressman, Ambassador, raises some important points there, that a lot of the violence that we're seeing in Central America, which is causing people to move to the border, is caused by drugs drugs that are consumed here in the United States. Do you think the administration here is approaching this in the right way? Are they really looking at the core problems of what's causing this rather than just throwing money at it?
I think they are. I think the driver of what this administration is trying to do, and this dovetails with now President Biden, then Vice President Biden's own experience in dealing with these issues in these countries when he was vice president, is to try and strike the right balance between the structural causes driving this, which are, again, economic, climate change driven, and driven by public insecurity, particularly in two of those three Northern Triangle countries, and at the same time, work to degrade, dismantle organized crime, which, like any business, does mergers and acquisitions. And what I mean is that they've muscled their way into smuggling and trafficking of people up to the United States. And so one of the aspects that I think the administration is trying to find is the right equilibrium between some of these more structural drivers of policy, and that's what they've been doing with the U.S. private sector and getting some of the companies that have a very important footprint in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America to support some of these endeavors, and at the same time, try and use some of the tools that have been built over time since the days of the Bush administration, when we developed the MEDI initiative to enhance security and law enforcement collaboration, and use some of those tools to strike at the heart of some of these criminal organizations that are piggybacking on the human misery and the refugees and the potential asylum claimants, plus migrants desperate because of the economic conditions particularly in the rural areas of Guatemala, coming up through Mexico on their way to the United States. So I think the Biden administration is striking the right balance. The question is, can they execute this, and can they execute this in a way which hopefully soon can start showing some constructive steps and some deliverables?
Rafael, there's one other spanner in the works, and that is the United States Supreme Court, which ruled on Monday that the U.S. government can block migrants who came into the country illegally from applying for permanent residence, that's applying for green cards. But there was an analyst on CNN, and he said that this will also throw up barriers for people known as dreamers. Those were children who were brought to this country by their parents many years ago. I mean, the solution would be for something to happen in Congress, for legislation to be tabled in Congress. But realistically, is that going to happen? Because this is, as we all know, a very hot-button political issue. It's a toxic issue.
You know, we all talk about root causes of emigration from Central America, but one of the root causes, and possibly the most serious root cause of chaos at the border and sort of immigration system dysfunction in general, is in Washington, D.C. And it's twofold. On the administration side, and we've seen this with the Trump administration and with the Biden administration, the president has way too much power to change immigration enforcement into whatever image he sees of it. And if the last 5 years haven't laid that out clearly, I don't know what will. And the other side is opposition to the executive functions so aggressively on talking points that have become so divorced from reality and from policy realities. Frankly, that so many of those talking points, we see them now, in this case attacking President Biden now, are just outright lies that it becomes impossible to do politics. The policy is sort of lost in the air, and that, of course, makes legislation impossible on an issue like immigration, unless one party can eventually find a way to get its priorities through the Congress without the collaboration of the other party. If that happens, maybe we'll see some reform in one direction or the other. Otherwise, it's stuck, and the real root cause is political dysfunction in D.C.
Adolfo, I don't have much time left, but what are your thoughts on reform? Do you see anything happening?
Well, I think there will be reform. We've had reform. It's been many decades since President Reagan launched that effort that was successful. And of course, it was almost an effort 15 years ago. But so long as it remains a very hot partisan issue, I think that's going to be very, very difficult.
I do want to just on that point, Adolfo, didn't President Reagan also grant amnesty to people who are in the country illegally?
Yes, he did. He granted amnesty, and then unfortunately, aspects of that law were never implemented in the early 1990s, and that led to that being a mistake, and that's something the Republicans are not going to make again. But this is one of the things I wanted to point out is the Supreme Court decision. That was an important question. That was decided 9-0, and decided 9-0 on a very important legal basis. It says something about the people who are here illegally. It's the following: you can't go from an illegal status to a legal status. That's the essence of the decision. And that's very important, which means this can only be resolved legislatively. But from a political standpoint, there's also a big development this weekend in McAllen, Texas, Hidalgo County, which is 85% Hispanic, and they've elected a Republican mayor. Why? Because of the flood of illegal immigration that's causing chaos in all of the border areas, led by Henry Cuellar, our Democrat. So when we talk, everybody's for immigration, legal immigration.
Right. I want to go very quickly. I've only got about 30 seconds left. I want to go to Congressman Gutierrez. Congressman, what do you make of what's happening, that Supreme Court decision, as well as anything coming out of this visit by the Vice President?
Well, I'm happy. We have a marvelous Cuban American that is head of Homeland Security, Mayorkas. He understood when President Obama said, "There's nothing I can do," and we called him out as deporter-in-chief. It was Mayorkas who stepped up and showed that there are laws on the books today to protect immigrants. I am just the silver lining. Mayorkas is still there as Homeland Security. Thank you for that Cuban American and that great tradition that he's brought to the United States of America.
Very quickly, Congressman, do you think this Supreme Court decision was a setback for these efforts?
No, I don't think it's a setback for the efforts. Nobody ever, I understood for a long time, when I worked with John McCain, when I worked with President Bush, when there were sensible, reliable Republicans who wanted to solve the problem and not use it as a bully pulpit, right, for their political rising, we looked at these issues and we knew that we needed to legislatively end the undocumented status through legislation in the Congress of the United States. That's the way it's always going to be resolved.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and thanks for watching.